A heated race for the Kansas House getting hotter as a former governor steps in. Plus, Republicans vying for Pat Roberts' seat just say no to another debate, calling it a non-debate designed to support the party's pick for the nomination. And to mask or not to mask? The governor says all Kansans need to cover up, but counties have the final say. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week.
Southwest National Bank has proudly served Wichita and its surrounding communities for over 100 years. We are happy to support KPTS, Public Television for Kansas.
I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. The big news in Kansas all week has been the governor's promised executive order requiring Kansans to wear a mask when indoors in public or unable to social distance outdoors. Now we have a look at what that order says and what it might mean for you. Let's take a look. In an order that went into effect at 12:01 Friday morning, the governor said most Kansans must wear a mask when not at home. She and KDHE Secretary Dr. Lee Norman both pointed to the once again rising number of cases in Kansas, saying masks everywhere is the only way to keep businesses and the economy open while preventing deaths. The order requires masks when inside or in line to enter a public space, or when outdoors and unable to stay 6 feet away from others. Also at medical facilities when riding public transportation, taxis, Ubers, and Lyfts. It tells businesses and organizations to require masks for customers and for employees when interacting with customers or in common areas. There are exemptions for children 5 and under, those medically incapable of wearing a mask, the hearing impaired for communication, when a mask would be a danger at work, while seated and eating at a restaurant, when playing sports that allow for social distancing like baseball, and when engaged in a legal activity that prohibits wearing a mask. Of course, this order is just the beginning of the questions. Here to help us delve a little bit deeper, we have Dr. Russell Arbin-Fox, political scientist from Friends University. And joining us by Skype, we have KNSS's John Whitmer, host of The John Whitmer Show. Thank you both so much.
Glad to be here.
All right.
Glad to be here as well.
Okay, so this is a very divisive issue. At some point, it went from being a medical issue to a political issue. So I'm going to start with Russell. Where did that happen and how did that happen?
Well, part of it happened the same way most things become politicized in the United States today. We're a very polarized country. We have the means to communicate about and argue about almost any issue that comes up. And so as these issues get argued about, they tend to break down along party lines. And if they don't obviously break down along party lines, people will create reasons to see them that way. The mask issue, I mean, there's some fairly obvious ways in which you could map it onto different ideological positions. You can make it an argument about the expertise of those that the government can call upon in crafting policy versus those that want to trust in individual judgment and are very, very defensive about their ability to make their own decisions. But even beyond that, you have, especially in the case of Kansas, some specific party positions that are being argued about. Laura Kelly, of course, came into office strongly pushing issues of health. And so, she's been able to act in regards to that issue as the pandemic has rolled forward. The Republican Party has, of course, positioned itself as trying to resist government involvement in health issues. And so falling on the anti-mask side has kind of fit for them politically as well.
And speaking of that, John, I know that you have some very outspoken concerns about mask mandates.
Well, and that's it. I think, Dr. Fox and I would agree on the importance of masks. Whether or not they're effective, I think the science is out. I've got a CDC expert who will be on the show Sunday, actually, and we're going to discuss this because there is questions about how effective they are. But I think you set that issue aside, and what it comes down to for me and for many is whether or not you need an authoritarian government that comes in and mandates it. That's the issue. We're adults. We're responsible for our own behavior. We don't need the nanny state that comes in and orders us and violates our personal liberty. And that's really the issue for a lot of us, is you're taking away personal liberties and issuing a mandate from on high that's very intrusive.
And yet there is a well-established point throughout law that says one person's rights ends where the next begin. And doctors have said time and again that the reason for everybody masking is we have 54% of the population roughly that has this virus that doesn't know it. They're asymptomatic. They're showing no symptoms and can be spreading it. And that the masks are about stopping the spread, not stopping the catch.
Sure, but again, we don't know. I mean, I know the guest that I'm going to have on Sunday is a CDC expert. He's an advisor who will tell you they don't know that a mask will prevent the spread. It might not. Again, set that aside. I will use the argument that pro-choice advocates have used for decades to justify abortion. It's my body, it's my choice. Well, that's the same choice here. We need to respect an individual's right to choose what they do with their body. If I don't want to wear a mask, then I shouldn't have the government coming in and mandating what I do with my body and my personal body. That's what it really comes down to.
I don't really know if a news show like this is an appropriate spot for an ideological argument. John is smart enough to recognize that there's a lot of ways in which you can push back against that. You can talk about how seatbelt laws are arguably an example of the nanny state, how health inspectors, meat inspectors are arguably an example of the nanny state. There's plenty of particular ways in which we could get into an ideological wrestling match about some of these. I would say that, certainly if you kind of take a look at what's gone on in front of the county commission, they've tapped an awful lot of medical experts. And there's a wide range of people. I'm sure the person that John is talking about interviewing is going to have some strong and well-informed points of view. There's a lot of people right now in Wichita at Via Christi and other places that are talking about the importance of the mask mandate. They also have a pretty well-informed point of view.
I'm glad you brought up the counties. We need to move on and take a look at that, because with recent changes in state law, that really leaves what happens with this order up to your local county. That reaction has been mixed. Some, like Johnson County, chose to enact the governor's order as written. Others, like Harper County, chose to completely opt out. Sedgwick County commissioners took a middle road Thursday night with warnings they could get stricter if cases continue to get worse here, as KSN's Alexis Padilla shows us.
I am not okay with one more person becoming infected in this community.
Face masks, hand hygiene, and social distance. These are the tools Commissioner Lacey Cruz says the county has against COVID-19, feeling frustrated after making her plea to adopt the mask mandate.
Recommendations don't work. And giving somebody another recommendation is only opening everything up for numbers to increase, for people to get sick, and for a potential shutdown to happen again in the future.
During the meeting, some community members waited outside to show their support for Governor Kelly's order, including Wichita Dr. Amy Seary.
One of my biggest fears is that we don't adopt this measure, and in the next few weeks, things are probably going to get really rough here in Sedgwick County.
Meanwhile, some commissioners like Michael O'Donnell felt a mandate was not practical.
We heard almost immediately from Sheriff Easter and from Chief Ramsey that they don't have the desire or the manpower to actually enforce the mandate. So what's the point of having a mandate that's unenforceable?
Leaving it to the community to step up and take their recommendations seriously.
It's an education process. I think that we need to try that first. But as I said, if it doesn't work, we're going to have to go with mandates, and I sure hate to do that.
Certainly a lot of debate. I was at that meeting, and they spent almost 3 hours discussing before finally taking a vote. As we look at the differing responses, how much of that has to do with the differing amounts of illness in each county, do you think?
Oh, clearly, the more incidences of COVID-19 that you have in any particular area, the more number of people are going to be exposed to that. Not exposed in the sense of, being affected by the disease, but be exposed to it in the sense of, oh my gosh, that's Aunt Mabel. Wait, that was my driving school instructor. Wait a minute, they drop off their kids at the same preschool I go to. It becomes more familiar to you. And as things become more familiar, that leads to changes of mind. It always functions that way. You could argue then that that maybe suggests that those county commissioners that are talking in terms of, let's wait and see, let's employ some educational methods, makes more sense. It fits in more with human nature. And, there's an argument for that. I think that there's a counter argument that says that the costs of waiting for that education to take place might be pretty great. The leader of the county commission, Pete Meitzner, he said explicitly after the meeting that, if the data changes, I'll be happy to go back and completely change everything that I said in this meeting. I mean, on the one hand, you think, okay, great for being open to changing your mind and getting educated, but on the same time, you might think that, that shows maybe not as much seriousness for really addressing the issue in front of you as some might hope for.
John?
I'm going to start with something that Dr. Fox said earlier in the last segment, the politicization. The first thing that Commissioner Cruz said in that segment was, I'm not okay with one more person getting sick. The implication there is that those who oppose, or her colleagues that voted no, are okay with people getting sick. That's part of the problem, is that message that she's implying, and some are outright saying, is that if you don't support a mask mandate, you want people to die. You want people to get sick. But you've got the attorney general, you've got the district attorney, you've got the sheriff, you've got the chief of police, and all across the state, you've got members of law enforcement who are saying this is unenforceable. It'll put too much of a tax on our law enforcement, too much a tax on our law community and our law enforcement, not only law enforcement, but the court system to try and enforce a mandate. Meanwhile, we've got other stuff that we need to focus on. We just created 4.8 million jobs this month, 2 million jobs next month, or last month, excuse me. Do we really want to go backwards? We're trying to recover. The last thing we need to do is pass another mandate and slow down what little economic recovery we've got going.
And yet everybody I've talked to who's in support of the mask mandate says that the whole purpose of having the mask mandate is to keep the economy open.
Not everybody, because there are people who recognize that if you start these mandates, you're going to effectively slow down the economy again. There are businesses that are going to suffer. There are people who will not be able to use the services involved. Don't get me wrong. I had my hair cut recently. I wore a mask while having my haircut because I respect my stylist and I respect the business owner. But you know what? That was my choice. It wasn't because the governor told me to do it.
John, just out of curiosity, who are some of the business leaders that you're thinking of that have come out explicitly against the governor's mandate? Because we had the leader of Fidelity Bank who is speaking out really prominently in favor of it. You've had some other major figures in the Wichita area who have said the same. I'm sure there are business leaders who are opposed to it, but I'm curious who they are.
Everybody refers to the Fidelity Bank CEO, but in that very same Skype call or Zoom call, you had the hospitality industry that said, no, we don't need this. You've had people from the hairstylists who, in fact, one of them was on the Zoom call who said it's not necessary. We're already doing it. That's the issue. People are already doing this and already complying. I'm fine with the education. You don't need a mandate.
But if they're already doing it, then the mandate would just follow along with what they're already doing, right?
The difference is you're going to threaten people at point of a gun, which is how government gets anything accomplished.
Well, but it's not really the point of the gun.
You don't wear a mask,
I'm
we're
going to jump in there. We're not getting anywhere with this discussion right now. We're kind of going in circles, and we do have some other things to talk about.
Fair enough.
So we're going to turn to the 2020 elections. An already unusual primary race in Wichita took a turn for the very rare this week as former Governor Jeff Collier got involved. Jeff Collier traveled to Wichita on Wednesday to announce he's endorsing Patrick Penn, a Republican challenger for the 85th District Kansas House seat currently held by Michael Capps. The former governor pointed to the history of scandals that have followed Capps in the 2 years since he took office. From the DCF findings against him to the recent accusations he asked a black Republican from Olathe to pose for pictures with him because Capps is running against a black opponent. Collier said he believes Capps has disqualified himself from holding the office.
He put himself above party and he put himself above the people. And okay, that's what we had to deal with. But then I met Patrick Penn. Okay? And this is a guy, you know, who really does believe in service.
We know no matter how much they try to maintain the status quo of their corrupt system, the people of the 85th deserve representation. They deserve somebody who's going to serve them, not the establishment, and certainly not the Topeka Swamp.
Among those at the event supporting Penn were former Representative Steve Brunk, who previously held Cap's seat, as well as county and state Republican Party leaders. Patrick Penn is a former Army captain who came to Wichita a couple of years ago to work for Textron Aviation Defense as program manager. He describes himself as a Christian conservative, dedicated husband, and active father of 4. And what I heard time and time again at that news conference was this is unprecedented. So my question is it unprecedented for a governor to get that involved in a primary race within his own party?
Well, it's not absolutely unprecedented, but it's very rare. Keep in mind a couple of things. One, Jeff Collier is not, in fact, the governor. He's a former governor.
Yes.
And so, and we have noticed that Jeff Collier has some real preferences about how his party develops. I mean, he was very, very vocal in trying to recruit Jake LaTurner to, challenge Steve Watkins in the 2nd District to present a primary challenge to him. So, we have seen before former Governor Collier come into these arguments amongst his fellow conservatives and try to articulate a particular vision. It's a vision that, from what I can see as an outsider, is, fairly reflective of the Republican establishment. I'm not sure how reflective it is of where most Kansas Republican voters are.
Yeah. And John, you've run your own races for the Kansas House. You had leaders from both state and county Republican parties there. That in itself at a primary level is eyebrow raising.
Oh, absolutely. The last time I can think of a national or state elected figure weighing in like this was when Senator Moran supported me in my own primary against a sitting incumbent. It's rare. I had Patrick Penn on the show last week. I actually have Representative Capps coming on the show this Sunday. I like to refer to this particular race as, frankly, a dumpster fire. I mean, this has been extremely volatile. Last week, Patrick Penn referred to Mike Capps as a child molester. There have been all kinds of bombs. The Pachyderm Club last week was incredibly contentious. It will be very interesting to watch. There have been accusations back and forth. I honestly don't know how this race will ultimately play out because, whether or not an incumbent gets endorsements, really in the end, the only thing that's going to matter is how the people vote.
John, if I could ask you, because you would know this much better than I, because you're much closer to, the Republican majority leadership than I am. Does Collier really speak for the establishment within the state GOP, or do you feel like, he's creating divisions within the party?
You're going to try and get me in trouble here.
No. I'm genuinely curious. I don't know.
I would say that Dr. Collier absolutely is a well-respected and well-regarded figure within the party. He also is definitely an establishment figure, and for lack of a better term, since he was the last sitting Republican governor, he represents a head of the party, for lack of a better term. He is well regarded. Now, he may not be seen as the figurehead for the Tea Party movement, or if maybe, but he is certainly within the establishment and party Republicans well regarded. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. And trust me, when I heard he was coming to Wichita to weigh in that race, it turned my head.
Interesting.
And I'm wondering how many voters' heads it will turn, because Capps has the incumbency, which is a huge advantage. He also has a major advantage in fundraising at this point.
Right. He also has an awful lot of bad press. And it's that kind of bad press that Jeff Collier was picking up on and responding to, and that you've seen some other Republican figures respond to. But that was kind of the point of my question to John, because I am genuinely curious as to how Capps is, frankly, surviving within the party as a whole. I mean, you've got local officials in Sedgwick County that have outright denounced him within the party itself. I mean, it's fascinating from stepping back, from the politics of it and just looking at the mechanics of it. I find it high drama.
Well, another race that is showing some very high drama, the Kansas Republican race for Senate. It has several candidates, and now there's a debate over debating that has led to a cancellation, all sparked by the candidates themselves. Last week's sparks flew when 3 of the top 4 Republican candidates met in Wichita for a debate the Republican Party hosted. All of the top 4 candidates were supposed to meet again in Atchison on the 15th. Until the party changed formats, moving from a traditional debate with all the candidates on the stage at once to a sequential forum, each candidate to have 15 minutes to answer questions alone on the stage. Bob Hamilton, Dave Lindstrom, and Chris Kobach all objected, saying the new format was designed to benefit party leadership's preferred nominee, Roger Marshall. Now, Lindstrom, Kobach, and Hamilton have joined forces in boycotting that debate, saying they'll plan one of their own instead. In a written statement, Marshall said he would keep his promise to only attend the party-organized debates, adding, "We will stay focused on getting our message out to Kansans and leave the inside baseball drama to desperate campaigns looking for their 15 seconds of fame." Okay, I'm actually going to start off with John on this one because, John, I know you've worked with Chris Kobach very closely before. What's going on here?
Well, I will say I'm not working for any of the campaigns this time around. And I can't say anything in particular because nothing is firmed up yet. But one of the things that the 3 candidates who chose to not participate in the debate, ultimately that debate has been canceled. The party canceled the last debate. I can tell you there is a high probability that a certain radio station and one of the major TV stations in Wichita will be hosting a debate on that date, and 3 of the candidates have agreed. We'll see if the Congressman Marshall joins them. Here's the thing. We all remember when the party chairman came out and wrote a letter and called upon 2 of the candidates to withdraw from the race. I think the biggest frustration that many Republicans have felt in all of this is let's let it go. Let's let them debate. Let's let them have it out and let the voters have their say instead of people trying to weigh in and tip the scales.
Okay, real quick, Russell, how unusual is this? It seems to be a lot of party machinations in these races this year.
Yeah, I mean, and it's quite unusual. If you went back in time a half century or a century, it wouldn't be as unusual because there were a lot more factions within the different parties that had their own regional bases that could, push forward their candidates. But now the parties, generally speaking, are much more unified, and the only time you see real factions emerge is when you have some deep ideological disagreements. And that's kind of what you have going on in the Kansas Republican Party right now. I have to agree with everything that John just said. Very simply, you have some people that are frightened of a candidate, and they do not want that candidate to win the nomination of their party. And so they are trying to make certain that you don't give any more attention to these candidates that Marshall referred to as desperate, as he marches towards the nomination.
Okay. Well, we do have one other thing to talk about. It is not politics, really, sort of, maybe. Finally, some good news for Kansas farmers and the ag industry. The new Nafta, or the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, is now in effect. Kansas Ag Secretary Mike Beam says that brings a lot of benefits to the state of Kansas. After years of discussion, a new trade deal between 3 North American countries went into effect Wednesday. The plan addresses a variety of areas, including the auto industry, labor laws, and agriculture. Mexico and Canada are 2 of the top 3 trade partners for Kansas agricultural products. Japan is number 2. Kansas Agricultural Secretary Mike Beam told KSN News Kansas farmers should feel a sense of security that the countries agreed to a deal. He said the deal's effects can increase demands for products, which could raise profits for farmers, especially in dairy and poultry fields.
Provides more access to these countries, particularly with Canada, on some of our agricultural products. So the timing couldn't be better to get this in place. And these two countries have, for a long time, have been our key important trading partners.
Beam also said in the 25 years since the last trade deal was signed, agricultural exports to Mexico and Canada have skyrocketed. So he's hoping for increased growth as a result of this deal, too. And I'm going to start off with you, John. This is something that's been in the works for quite some time. Farmers certainly looking forward to it, but we are also coming out of this pandemic dip, shall we call it, in the economy. Is it going to make as big of a difference as it might have if we hadn't gone through that?
Oh, I'm sure it's an improvement. Any opportunity to increase trade is a benefit. The key, I think, for farmers is it brings security and certainty. There were a lot of questions about whether or not China would be participating and whether we could restore some of the trade issues with our North and South partners in particular. This at least gives them security. It gives them a stable marketplace. And that's been the biggest issue, I think, for ag communities in particular. So from that regard, it can't be anything but a benefit.
And yet at the same time, we are still dealing with a pandemic. Does that put some of those benefits in jeopardy?
Oh, well, certainly, but they would be in jeopardy anyway because the pandemic and its consequences on, the agricultural output and trade in Western Kansas, that was going to happen regardless of whatever kind of deal is in place. There's a whole bunch of ways in which you can argue about, deals like this from a geostrategic perspective or a macroeconomic perspective. Just looking at what's in the deal itself, the one thing that stands out is that Trump actually got Canada to open up, some of their dairy trade to U.S. importers, and that was a sticking point for a long, long time. So if you're a dairy farmer, this was a big win.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it at that. Russell, John, thank you both so much for joining me this week. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, the Wichita Eagle, and Cake News for sharing their stories with us. We'd love to hear what you think. Just email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, stay safe and have a great week.
Southwest National Bank has proudly served Wichita and its surrounding communities for over 100 years. We are happy to support KPTS, Public Television for Kansas.